Please rise and sing hymn 145 as tranquil streams.
Parade is a ballet with music by Eric Satie with a one-act scenario by Jean Cocteau. Satie was a master of musical glimpses. He was also
Welcome. My name is Jeanette Faber. I'm today's worship associate. And there are 3 announcements for today. The first is that it's time to sign up for small group ministries. The next round of small groups will run from this March through June of 2024, and 6 different groups are being offered. Small groups offer a chance to connect with others in a more relaxed, more personalized setting than we often get after worship on Sundays. You can get more details and sign up either online or by visiting the small group ministry table in the social hall after worship for the next 3 weeks. Today's welcome is by the UU minister, Reverend Jane Ellen Maudlin. Welcome to this time of seeking and finding, for it is in our own coming together here that we celebrate who we are and who we yet shall be.
We actually have 2 chalice lightings this morning. The first is from my friend Sarah Moores Campbell, who was in my Div School class many years ago. She writes, "We receive fragments of holiness, glimpses of eternity, brief moments of insight. Let us gather them up for the precious gifts that they are, and renewed by their grace, move boldly into the unknown." And I mentioned that there was yet another reading as well. And this is what we do as we gather here every week. This week, a 2-year-old red monster broke the internet when Elmo asked, "How y'all doing?" And literally thousands of people, like a million, wrote back, "Not doing good, Elmo. Lost my job. Things are looking dour. Things are looking dark." But the thing was, Elmo elicited people's honesty. And they replied, and they formed a weird kind of network. That's what we do. We ask every week, as we light this chalice, how are you doing? And Sonny, if you lead us in our covenant.
And before we move into our covenant, I do want to bring to your attention that it is time for the Stewardship Kickoff Extravaganza, and the Stewardship Committee invites you all to attend this extravaganza on Saturday, February 17th. That's right here from 6 to 8 p.m. There will be a chili supper, fantastic entertainment with our very own Bill Braun, and Friends ice cream and moth-style storytelling. Childcare will be provided. And also, we invite you, if you are here for the first time and have questions about Unitarian Universalism, you can come grab a bowl of soup. It is Soup Sunday, and grab some bread or a cup of tea and coffee and join us in the social hall. And then afterwards, in room 209 upstairs, you can visit the monthly visitor chat, and children are welcome to attend. That is sponsored by the Connections team. So as we move into our covenant portion of the service, I wanted to share just a brief story this morning to preface this. Last week, I had an interview for placement in a clinical pastoral education program, and this is an element that's required for my ordination track, and I'll be doing that hopefully over summer break this year. I was not the only candidate on this call, and the interviewers asked about our faith traditions and how our own faith tradition would inform the spiritual care that we would be providing over the summer to the folks in the hospital. The other candidate on the call was a nun. She had been a nun for 30 years, and she referenced the New Testament and spoke of the sacraments. And then when it was my turn, I acknowledged that our UU tradition draws from many sacred texts, from many traditions, but we have no creed or particular set of beliefs that unite us. Instead, I said that it is covenant that lies at the center of our faith, and how we Unitarian Universalists gather and show up for one another in community. And I mentioned some of those values that we recite each week. So for example, I said listening deeply would inform the spiritual care I would provide, and seeking humor and joy would inform the spiritual care that I would provide. And I encourage you, if you want to check out our full covenant, you can do so at our website, which is still down at the moment. Our apologies, usnh.org. Keep trying back. But as we recite today the brief version of the covenant that we do every week, I invite you to consider just how special it is that we are part of a tradition that comes together in this way, with these promises that allow us to create beloved community within this congregation, but also inspire and inform how we show up in the world. So I invite you now to read with me those words that appear in your order of service and in the chat in the live stream. We covenant together to create and nurture a culture of respect and kindness, and to engage in the spiritual and everyday practice of loving more generously. To this end, we will strive to be open, value differences, listen deeply, use kind language, speak our truths, work with conflict, and seek humor and joy.
Good morning. My name is Jesse Grice. I'm the director of Lifespan Religious Education here, and my pronouns are he and him. And quick poll. I wanted to know how many of you yourselves, or how many of you have known someone who has ever actually spent time stranded on a deserted island waiting for rescue? I had a feeling. Okay, so we have one. Excellent. Good. We have two. Perfect. I get the feeling sometimes, I know that this actually happens, but I get the feeling that if you watch television, read books, and listen to popular culture, that writers seem to think that this happens way more than it actually happens. So, except for Fred and Gwen, I'm going to ask the rest of you to suspend disbelief for a moment. And I invite you to listen to this story in the spirit of allegory, in the spirit of parable and or metaphor. Fred and Gwen, you can take it literally if you'd like. A group of friends found themselves, through what we presume to be unfortunate circumstances, on a desert island, stranded without any hope of immediate rescue. They discovered very quickly that their basic needs could be met through gathered rainwater and through food sources that were on the island itself. They found shelter. They were able to meet their basic needs, as I mentioned, but they began to have a kind of a spiritual moment. Some of them began to have some doubt about how long it was going to take for them to return to the rest of society. So they decided that each afternoon they were going to gather together for a time of prayer, a time of reflection. And so a couple of them began to take more leadership roles. You know how sometimes things begin to organize societally once a group of people finds themselves. So those who were more predisposed towards a ministerial role began taking leadership roles in their meetings and offering prayers, hope. And they would gather each afternoon and form a circle on the beach, listening to the waves crash against the rocks. And they would hear words that went something like this: we hope, we pray that someday we will find rescue and find our way home. Day after day, they gathered at the same time, in the same place, and repeated this prayer. After, let's call it about 2 or 3 weeks, after the prayer was spoken, one person lifted up their hand and said, I'm wondering if we might actually start looking at ways that we might get off this island. I've noticed that there's these long bamboo sticks around. I've noticed that there are vines that might be capable of tying this together, and maybe we could make a raft. And those that had risen into leadership positions immediately felt threatened. No, we must pray. We must hope upon hope for rescue even more. Be gone with your silly ideas. Well, during the night that night, the person who had proposed tying the raft together went down to the beach and began weaving vines and sinew around some bamboo poles and making a raft. And when they all gathered at the beach the next day, behold, a miracle! Let us pray. Let us send our thoughts and hopes and prayers even more strenuously that this raft will continue to come together. And the next day, after a night had passed, lo and behold, the raft was longer, more bound, and even had the beginnings of a sail on it. These miracles did not cease for the next 3, 4, 5 days. And finally, this group was ready to set sail in the direction of new hopes and new dreams. So the thought I leave with you as we sing our children up to their classes is each of you has a question to answer for yourselves. To what degree is hope and prayer enough? And to what degree do we build ships in the night? Congregation, please rise in body or spirit, and let's sing the children onto their classes with hymn number 18, What Wondrous Love.
For joys and sorrows, I have one thing to share today. Linda Pollock is recovering from an operation performed on Friday, January 26th. She is at home, resting comfortably, and being cared for by her family, by her USNH friends, and by her neighbors.
Today, Reverend Stephen in his sermon will be taking us beyond optimism. So for our meditation this morning, I invite us to give ourselves fully to this present moment. And we're going to do so with a Buddhist-inspired technique. So I invite you now to close your eyes if that feels safe and comfortable doing so. If not, you can always just keep a soft focus in the middle distance. And I invite you first to notice your breath, finding a comfortable, even pace. Feeling the weight of your body on the pew and the connection of your feet to the floor. Now we're going to do a scan of your body, starting with your feet, going all the way up to your head. And all you have to do as I walk us through this is simply notice, without judgment as much as possible, what your body is feeling as we do this scan. So in other words, notice where you feel pain or discomfort, or notice where you are tense or maybe relaxed. So now taking your awareness to your feet, we will start there. Moving from your feet into your calves, past your knees and into your thighs, up into your pelvic bowl, into your gut and stomach, up into your solar plexus and your chest and heart area, over the tops of your shoulders and down your arms, into your wrists and hands, moving around to your lower back, into your upper back, your neck and throat, and up the back of your head, over the top, and down into your face, and ending with your jaw. As we now enter a brief moment of silence, I invite you to consider what you noticed during this scan and simply be present with it, surrendering to those sensations. And after this silence, we will be called back by a musical response.
Our offering. Unitarian Universalism is rooted in peace, love, and justice. It takes optimism to believe that these values are possible in our world. Please offer whatever you are able so we may continue to make the possible probable. Offerings can be made via the ushers at the back of the service, or by visiting usnh.com, or by mailing a check to 700 Hartford Turnpike, Hampton, Connecticut, 06517. You may also text your pledge to give. The phone number for that is in your order of service. However your generosity manifests itself, know that whatever you have to offer is always gratefully received.
For our reading today, sometimes we do a responsive reading, but today we're going to try a unison reading. So for those who wish to participate, feel free to stay seated, but I invite you to turn in your hymnal to number 698, and we will read together. Everyone got it? Take courage, friends. The way is often hard. The path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage, for deep down there is another truth. You are not alone.
This service is going insanely fast, so I've got time to tell a joke. When Jesse was talking about anybody out there ever lost on an island, I was thinking no, but I have been through some interminable religious services. And it reminded me of a wonderful story of a man taking his child to Memorial Hall at Harvard. And there, if you've ever been there are, sadly, the list of so many hundreds of Harvard graduates, their names inscribed in the marble. And the child said, "Daddy, why are all those names there?" And the father said, "They died in the service." And the child said, "Was it the 9 o'clock or 11 o'clock?" Okay, I think we've caught up with ourselves now. We pay so much attention to the young Martin Luther King Jr. But since he died, as I mentioned several weeks ago, only at the age of 39, actually, he was always the young king. But the young king who burst upon the nation's notice at the Montgomery bus boycott and all the way up to 1963 and the March on Washington. Repeatedly, over and over, he had a riff. King's sermons and speeches were often like jazz put together. He had certain themes and he would interweave them and he would move them differently in different places depending on the audience and the moment. And he spoke repeatedly of his having a dream. And of course, it culminated in the great I Have a Dream speech before the Lincoln Memorial. We all remember the cadence, the rolling images, the I have a dream threaded through so poignantly, so dramatically, until the very old spiritual that ended it all in a crescendo. Free at last, God Almighty, I am free at last. But there were 5 more long years from that mountaintop experience the king had to endure. And everything changed. Early on, he could depend on the Bull Connors of Birmingham, Alabama, to be his opponents, to highlight the efficacy and power of nonviolence, of evil versus good. But after 1963 and the March on Washington, things got complicated. He went up north, and Mayor Daley of Chicago was no Bull Connor. And then he began to speak out against the Vietnam War. King said the United States is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. And it began to seem irrelevant to fellow black leaders who said this focus on nonviolence is getting us nowhere, that white liberals are hardly awakening. We need something else. We need a new path. And King is washed up. And King began to speak not just about civil rights, but the rights of human beings to pay their rent and to have food to eat and to educate their children. And to the very rot of the capitalist system itself. And so his fellow civil rights leaders said, "Martin, what are you doing? You're diluting our message." So not only is nonviolence problematic, but you're suddenly talking about the rights of everyone in terms of dealing with poverty and the very roots of capitalism itself. And in the last year of King's life, in the Gallup poll, only 32% of Americans approved of him. He was not a popular man. This week I discovered an old interview with Sandra Van Oker of NBC News, who went to Ebenezer Church and interviewed King in the last year of his life. You should look it up. You just Google it, YouTube it, it's right there. And in it, a very subdued king is talking about how everything had changed. The simplicities of the early civil rights movement had changed. In some sense, he had entered into a period of agony. He said that the old optimism had been, quote, a little superficial, and now is tempered with a solid realism. He was surrounded by so many people second-guessing him, speaking of his irrelevance. And then he said words that chilled me to the bone. And I suspect that they are words whose reverberation has not yet ended. Tragically, frustratingly, to our own time. He said to Vanocur, "In many ways, my dream has turned into a nightmare." Was he being cynical? No. Far from it. In fact, I have to tell you, I find this Martin Luther King Jr. much more impressive. And he becomes a soul for me to learn from. Because he isn't Olympian anymore. And he isn't imbued with sort of a serene self-confidence. He's worried deep in his bones. And he knows, as he said, we have a long, hard journey ahead of us. Because he pressed on. He did not retreat. He expanded his mission and sense of purpose. He faced derision and misunderstanding and scorn, and he did not stop. And for him, and what I want to talk about today, it ceased being about results. Oh, he would have loved America to face up to its original sin. He would have loved us to stumble in, to embrace the sense of the beloved community. But one way or the other, he was not going to give up. And even if his heart was broken, he was absolutely unwilling to cease. Again, in the words of the old spiritual, keep pressing on. Things were not moving his way, but he was still on his way. How did he find that strength, that inner stability, that willingness to endure, which I would submit is exactly what we need today for us in our time, in our challenges? He got it from many sources, from his faith, yes, and he got it from a personal experience that he'd had as a young man. Immediately after the bombing of his home back in Montgomery, when he had what he felt was a personal experience. Up to then, he'd been very much an intellectual Christian, but he had a experiential moment where everything changed for him. It became quite personal, quite deeply emotional. But he had one more source, and that was Gandhi. And that's really where I think he found the equipoise, the equanimity, the ability to face when things were not going to go his way. And this is precisely what we need, you and I. Not just in our national life, but in our daily life. All the things we have to cope with and deal with when things do not go our way. And what allows us to get past optimism and beyond optimism. So another young man, we think of Gandhi as sort of thin and wizened, like a little Yoda-like figure wandering through history. But learn about the young barrister in training, Gandhi, wearing pinstripes and going to the law temples in London. And that's where he'd gone to become a lawyer. And in 1926, he was asked, would you like to translate the Bhagavad Gita? And he confessed, to his shame, that he had never read it. Neither in English nor in Sanskrit. But he did. He sat down to read it. Translated already in England as the song Celestial. And as he read it, he was changed forever. For the rest of his life, he would call the Gita his eternal mother. And it is here that this doctrine infused his life, was transmitted later to King, and may be translated and given to each and every one of us today. The Gita is 700 verses. It's a short excerpt in a longer epic of war, where on the eve of battle, the warrior Arjuna is being counseled as to facing the battle the next morning. And his charioteer turns out to be the god Krishna. And in the conversation between the two, the warrior Arjuna and Krishna, doctrines of selflessness, compassion, returning evil with good, all these things come to the fore, but principally the notion of renunciation, sannyasa. To face life without desire for the fruits of action. And I really want to drill down on this today. To face life without desire for the fruits of action. In other words, to not be attached to the results of what you choose to do, but rather to be attached merely and utterly and completely to compassion itself. And he needed it. He wrote, in my times of despair, when doubts haunt me, when disappointments me stare me in the face, I go back to the Gita. And it is a curious and I believe ultimately important message, because we sometimes think of non-attachment as being passionless, of overarching life. No, that is not what Gandhi is saying. It's not what he got from the Gita. It isn't non-attachment as we would normally understand it. Because it's not non-attachment to action. Far from it. You are to be attached to action and to focus and to movement, to engagement, to responsibility. But you are asked to be non-attached to what the world will later recognize of your efforts. And that's really hard, because we like the world to think well of us. We want to be rewarded in life. But in the spiritual realm, something else is going on. And from the Gita transmitted to King's last years and to, I believe, our efforts today, we must find an inner attitude where we move beyond reward or blame, success or failure, praise or honor, even to be willing to endure disdain. For Gandhi, these were noble ideas. They infused the rest of his life, his sense of mission and of purpose. They're very, very hard to live. But it is possible. It is absolutely possible. I'm nowhere close to it, but I recognize it. I see it on the horizon, and I know that my heart is drawn there. And you don't have to be a king or a Gandhi to practice it. And what I often talk to folks who are deeply involved in social justice work, what is the first thing they often talk about? Disappointment, burnout, discouragement, self-blame, and exhaustion. And why? Because the world is a very hard thing to move, and sometimes our own hearts are even harder. All very human, all very understandable. But often, and especially in the spiritual life, which is, I would translate, your essence, that which fuels you, provides your motive energy for every day, that our going forward can sometimes go wrong at the very first step if we do not understand non-attachment. Gandhi once said, "My job is to test truth on the anvil of life." Life will test you hard. And that's where it counts, and that's why we have to sometimes move past happiness, sometimes move past optimism, to embrace a wholeheartedness that encompasses renunciation, not of action, but of ego. And was this late King's travails? Were these things done easily? No. Wasn't easy for anyone, and will never be easy. And that's why it's worth doing. Nothing in the end kept King from his intended purpose. But we do not have to be king, and we do not have to be Gandhi, and we don't have to be anyone other than ourselves. But the same principles apply. That there is a lure and an invitation to be happy in this life, and there is also a deeper impulse to move beyond even optimism to this state. I was once counseling someone many years ago, and they said, "I find I'm much happier now that I've given up even expecting to be happy." I found that just profoundly sad. What a quote. But there's nothing new in it. Sentence from the book of Job. It doesn't matter whether it was written 3,000 years ago or 300 seconds ago. These words, "People are born to trouble as surely as sparks fly upward." But even as sparks rise, so do human beings, and so do their hearts. We rise and we rise again. And even as those sparks rise, we understand that there's something beyond the present motivation. Something is pulling us. Something is luring us. Something is inviting us. I have seen it, and I have felt it, and I have always understood that it is a live option to each and every one of us. And the real question is, what do we find that can sustain us, to hold us up, to be that foundational quality of life? Faith is not hoping for the best. It is the ability to understand what is real for us, even when we face the worst. William James, the great Harvard psychologist, said how to gain and how to keep and how to recover happiness is, in fact, for most people, for most times, the secret motive for all that they do and all that they are willing to endure. And so I do not come to this pulpit to give you palliatives or platitudes. What we all need and what we all yearn for has to be the real thing. That access to that spiritual motive power that offers renewal, it's never going to be an easy phrase. It is a complicated dance of a full-hearted, a full openness, acceptance to the realities of our life, and also our engagement, our will towards action. And we find, in the end, that we must have a deep purpose in life. Now, this is tricky. I understand that. But we do know through psychological studies, especially of older folks, that one of the best predictors of happiness has been whether a person in his or her life has had, as they move through life, a sense of purpose. A sense of purpose. When people had a sense of purpose, 7 in 10 felt satisfied about their quality in life. Without that, 7 in 10 felt unsettled in their lives. It's one of the reasons that I so enthusiastically endorse the small group ministries in the life of this congregation, so that people can sit together in a circle, face to face, talk about what matters to them. How you doing? It is far easier to withstand troubled times and heartache when we have a deep sense not only of our purpose and where we're going, but also who is willing to go with us and to listen. So purpose is very important, and to have someone to articulate it to means everything. And the other I want to talk about is focus. Sometimes psychologists call it reframing. Happy people, we've discovered, do not experience success upon success. In fact, their lives are precisely as muddled and imprecise and difficult as people that describe themselves as unhappy. The difference between happy and unhappy people, we've discovered, is that unhappy people think twice as much time thinking about what has been unpleasant or incomplete in their life. And they gnaw on it like a bone. They just can't let it go. But other people find ways to reframe and refocus. It is not merely optimism. It is a very stern spiritual discipline that takes work and practice and help. One more story about a real person. Anybody here remember Eric Lindell? You probably saw him in the Oscar-winning movie Chariots of Fire. In fact, now the song will start playing in your head. Da, 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 and you won't get it out. The world remembers him as winning an Olympic gold medal. He was the fastest runner in the world. And he represented Scotland in the Olympics And he realized that the race he had trained virtually all of his life for was scheduled on a Sunday, and because of his faith, he realized he could not run. In all the English newspapers, he was declared a traitor to his country. So he decided to run in the 400 meters, a race he had never run before. And he won the gold medal. But the story of the movie Chariots of Fire doesn't tell the full story. Because he became a missionary in China, and he taught and worked. When Japan invaded China in the late 1930s, and with so many others, he was caught up and was imprisoned. And he could have left, but he stayed because he wanted to stay with the young people who were also interred. And with his warmth and good nature, he was with 1,800 others in the Shantung compound, the Spartan internment camp. He was remembered after the war as the joyful one, the one who always has a smile on his face. He worked with the children. He taught them science and music. He led games. And a young internee who later became a prominent theologian at the University of Chicago, Landon Gilkey, remembers Eric Lindell very well. He came as close to being a saint as anyone I've ever known. I would pass the games room and peer in to see what they were cooking up for the teenagers, and I would, often as not, see Eric bent over a chessboard or a model boat or directing some sort of square dance, absorbed, warm, interested, pouring all of himself into this effort to capture the minds and imaginations of these imprisoned youth. And if anyone could have done this, he could. He had a spring in his step, overflowing with good humor and life. It was his enthusiasm and charm that carried the day. Just before the war ended, he died of a brain disease, literally months before liberation. And as he lay in the arms of a friend, the nurse Annie Buchan, he spoke his last words. Annie, it's complete surrender. What was he surrendering to? Was it despair? No. Was it blame or self-pity? No. I think in those words he showed all of us what it can be about when purpose and focus and attention and reframing all come together. Beyond optimism itself, because we are always, constantly, being invited into this richer and deeper life, certainly a larger and more expansive vision of what is possible in us and through us, and what is in fact our true potential, what is our noblest essence, who we are, no matter what happens to us. And this is never a guarantee that things are going to go great. But it is an invitation to understand that we have something beckoning us that is so strong and so unyielding that we may give ourselves over to it. And I know that Unitarian Universalists, because we're pull ourselves up by the bootstrap type folks, we might not even intuitively attach ourselves to the word surrender. But I would invite you to retranslate these words. To say, Annie, it's complete wholeheartedness. I give myself to this power. To find a larger vision of ourselves, the ability to know a little more mercy than justice, to be more ready to forgive than to keep on judging, to really hope in the right now of our lives, no matter our burdens or our past. In the end, I translate that into wholeheartedness. To be non-attached to what the world thinks, and to give my whole heart to be attached to the work that we are each born to do. An expansive sense of self. And knowing that who and what we are is never bound into what and how this world will reward you, because it may not. And you do it anyway. You press on. You make the difference. Attach yourself to this, to the ultimate non-attachment of all things that are yet to be and may be with our joint effort. Amen. I invite you to rise as you are willing and able for verses 1 through 3. I've got Peace Like a River, number 100, Peace Like a River. I've got peace like a river, got peace like a river, got peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, got peace like a river in my soul. Joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain, got joy like a fountain, I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean, I've got love like an ocean in my soul. I've got love like an ocean, I got love like an ocean, got love like an ocean in my soul.
As we go to extinguish the chalice, I invite you to recite along with me the words printed in your order of service for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Now may peace, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge of love. May this peace be yours in the week to come. Amen, and go in peace. But first, be seated for beautiful music.
Thank you.